So as you guys may already know, Larry Hoover, the boss of the Gangster Disciples, is now 70 years old, and he's still sitting in a supermax prison and has been trying to get released under the First Step Act. Okay, he's got a lawyer, but they have now brought a new indictment against him. He's been named in this, and he's not accused in the indictment of any wrongdoing specifically, but he is named in it as having made decisions that involved gang leadership in more recent years. Okay, so his request for release, obviously, to this point has not been honored, but several other like Gangster Disciples members, I've done videos on these guys, like high-ranking bosses that are no longer in those positions and no longer active, have been released under that act. But the Chicago Tribune is reporting, though, that notorious Gangster Disciples chairman Larry Hoover was convicted in federal court in Chicago 2 decades ago of continuing to run his criminal empire, even as he was serving a 200-year sentence in state prison for murder. Since then, Hoover, who's now 70, has been serving out 6 life terms at the Supermax Federal Prison in Florence, Colorado, a facility that housed convicted terrorists and mobsters and is touted as the most secure in the country. So, a new federal indictment filed this week in federal court in southern Illinois suggests that Larry Hoover has still been calling shots for the gang he helped establish in Chicago in the 1960s. The indictment was unsealed on Monday, and it accused 7 state and national leaders of the Gangster Disciples of racketeering, conspiracy, drug trafficking, witness intimidation, and multiple murders, including the 2018 slaying of a 65-year-old ranking member of the gang on Chicago's South Side. So, though Hoover was not accused of wrongdoing, the indictment alleged that in September 2014, Gangster Disciples members Anthony Dobbins and Warren Griffin discussed how Hoover had recently appointed them as board members, which is a powerful position directly beneath Larry Hoover that gave them authority over the gang's national operation. The charges do not state how Hoover may have made such a decision, given that he was behind bars in solitary confinement. Dobbins is now 53, and he's currently serving a sentence for drug trafficking at the same prison as Hoover, and he isn't due to be released until 2033. And Griffin, he's 51. He's also in federal prison in Kentucky on a separate case and is set to be released in 2025. So both Dobbins and Griffin are charged in the new indictment with racketeering, conspiracy, and murder. The indictment, meanwhile, comes as Hoover has been seeking an early release from his federal sentence under the First Step law passed in 2018 that has already led to reduced sentences for several other of his co-defendants. And Hoover's attorney said that in a statement that Hoover appeared to have been added to the new indictments gratuitously and without basis in an effort to spurn Hoover's request for release. So he said that there's absolutely no way for inmates at Hoover's prison to communicate anything remotely gang-related to the outside world without the prison knowing about it, let alone give specific orders that would go undetected for years. He says this is a 70-year-old man in the twilight of his years who has serious medical complications and is seeking release to finally be with his wife, children, and grandchildren after nearly 50 years of separation. To have his name continuously thrown into the affairs of others and to be used as a scapegoat for criminal activity he has no connection to needs to cease. So, among those charged in the new indictment was a guy named Frank, he's 47, of Naperville, which is a suburb to the west of Chicago, another Gangster Disciples board member who was convicted along with Hoover in the federal racketeering case in the late 90s. Smith is also known by his street names Little Frank and Redbeard. He was one of the organizers of a birthday celebration for Hoover in Chicago in November of 2017. So in asking to hold Smith, that's according to the charges, that's alleged, but in asking to hold Smith without bond, prosecutors said in a motion filed in Chicago on Tuesday that in the decades since his conviction, Smith's involvement in the gang has deepened and that he has used his newfound stature in order to order the killing in April of 2018 of a rival during a meeting in a suburban St. Louis park. In that murder, which took place in broad daylight and within sight of a children's playground, more than 70 shots were fired, including rounds from an AK-47 assault rifle, and the attack left one victim, a guy named Leroy, dead at the scene, and 2 others badly wounded. In a raid on Smith's home last year, federal agents found numerous firearms, a library of hard-copy Gangster Disciples literature, and a cell phone that revealed years' worth of gang-related communications, including detailed efforts by Smith to identify and retaliate against witnesses. Smith was also captured on federal wiretaps, talking with open hostility towards government witnesses, including one intercepted call where he allegedly remarked about a celebrity defendant believed to be cooperating. The longer it takes for someone to whack him, he said, the worse things are going to be. That's what he said on the call. The indictment also accused Griffin and Dobbins of killing a guy named Ernest, whose street name was Don Smokey. He was a rival board member during a dispute over power on Chicago's South Side. Now, this guy, 65, was shot in the face near his home on the South Side, and officers found him unresponsive in the street in front of a mid-sized apartment building. So that is the update on Larry Hoover. So why was Larry Hoover locked up in the first place? For people who don't know, this happened back on February 26 of 1973. A guy named Pookie, his actual government name was William Young. He was 19 years old at the time, and he was part of the dope game, okay, back then. So over by 68th and Union, he was killed, okay? Now, it somehow got to the cops that this was ordered by Larry Hoover. It was carried out by another guy, but Larry Hoover was supposedly the one who gave the order because this guy had been stealing drugs from the Black Gangster Disciples. Okay, so Larry Hoover and also the guy who had actually physically done the murder, this was a guy named Andrew Howard. They got booked, and they were both charged and sentenced to 150 to 200 years in prison. So the first place where Larry Hoover went was Stateville, but he was continuing to basically run everything from behind bars. And it was during this time, actually, that he created the Folks Alliance. I mean, it was basically like there was no blockage whatsoever between him and the streets at this time, and he was still completely involved in all the criminal activities that were going on outside of prison. So he actually formed the Folks Nation from behind bars. Now, the BGDs, you guys know, eventually broke apart. There was like a dispute on the South Side. And by the way, for Folks Nation gangs, you know, this was like an alliance that Larry Hoover formed. But this was not just black gangs in this. There were also white gangs, and there were also Hispanic gangs that were part of this Folk Nation alliance. Folks, I should say. So that whole thing eventually totally fell apart. Now, when I was a kid, I remember this was still a thing. 80s and 90s, like early 90s, I should say. Like later on, by the mid 90s, it was pretty much dead. But like, I remember, like, man, the folks thing was big, and the people thing was big too. When I was in school, the police actually came to our class and gave like an assembly presentation. This was multiple days long, showing us slides like on those old projectors that they used to have, showing guys dressing a certain way and telling us like everything to wear and not to wear. You know, don't cock your hat to this side, don't bang your hat to this side, don't roll this pant leg up. Guys would wear an earring on one particular ear. Guys used to do that back then. You know what I'm saying? Like, now you see guys, it's still, even to this day, like guys who grew up in my generation, we'll see like a GD wearing like red and black and be like, what? Like, you know, that's almost like seeing a Crip wearing like red. You know what I'm saying? It's like, we still don't think of it like that, but this younger generation's on a whole different thing. But that all happened while Larry Hoover was behind bars. But like I said, it eventually fell apart. So there was a dispute which possibly was over dope, possibly was over something else. To this day, I really don't know what was actually at the bottom of why the dispute began. But the BGDs changed into the GDs, okay, and the black disciples broke off from them. And so while Larry Hoover was incarcerated, he was continuing to run this thing. This was up until the mid-90s. Okay, it wasn't like in the 70s he dropped his flag and started going clean. He was continuing to do all the criminal activity really up until he got sent away to the Supermax prison. Okay, so that happened on August 22nd of 1995. And this investigation had been going on for 17 years by the feds. He was indicted at that point for conspiracy, extortion, and continuing to engage in a criminal enterprise. And he was sent to the Dixon Correctional Center by federal agents and then moved to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Chicago to stand trial. And he was found guilty, and he was sent to the U.S. Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado. Okay, so that's where he's at. Now, his lawyer says that there's no way that he could be communicating street stuff. These new charges say that he's been continuing even there
to run it. GDs have a lot of money, and like I said, they still have like some structure in other states, and it's easy to conceive of the fact that they might be able to somehow get the word from Larry Hoover out to the street, even from there. I don't know for a fact. I'm not saying that the charges are true or not true, but if he was appointing board members though while he was back there, that's running it. I mean, that's running it. A lot of people feel very strongly about Larry Hoover. What they say is that he was a black guy who had attained a lot of power, and so he has a lot of cultural capital in the black community as far as like pride, because of the fact that he was able to amass so much power. Now, me personally, like when guys from my own ethnic group or own race like amass power in that way, personally, I look at that as like a negative. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, guys like Gotti, guys like Capone, they're at the end of the day preying mostly on their own people. I know this like growing up, just on the northwest side of Chicago, like hearing about all the stories about my neighbors, like people that somehow got caught up in that whole machine. At the end of the day, it was a negative, like for the people that they were supposed to be repping. But has the mob really, like, for example, helped Italians? It's kept Sicily back. I mean, it's kept Italy, like, really, it's been a ball and chain around the foot of their progress for the last 150 years and kept them from really, keeping up with the rest of Europe. And I mean, by this, I mean, I don't just mean Italy, I mean the whole surrounding area. I mean, that whole area is like embroiled in, just underground activities and stuff that just keep the government and keep the economy from running the way that it would need to run in order to advance. And Western Europe and Northern Europe are advancing at a much faster pace. I personally don't look at these kinds of figures, and amongst whites, we got plenty of guys like this. I don't look at these kinds of figures as helping progress or doing anything positive for like the community that they rep. Like even something like taking pride in a guy like that amassing power. For me personally, that's like a delusion. Like pride mostly like leads to just this self-deception, and like putting a person in a fantasy world, albeit voluntarily. But none of the stuff that they're really supposedly accomplishing is real. So that's just my personal take, man. You guys can let me know what you think, man. But pride comes before a fall. I don't see like taking pride in guys like this or in anything really as leading to progress. It sends things backwards. But that's just my highly biased journalistic viewpoint. This is your boy, Winnie C. Report, and I'm out.